Hello, my name is Stacey Couch and my website is wildgratitude.com. Welcome here on this December day. It's something like 30 degrees outside, but it's sunny and beautiful. So I figured it was a great opportunity to share with you some more in-depth information about archetypes. In regards to reading archetypes for accepting others, one of the main things we have to remember is that archetypes are actually neutral. There is no such thing as a good or a bad archetype, right? So that in theory sounds like a really great thing. Okay, yeah, I understand. There's no good or bad, it's neutral. The archetypes are balanced. Each archetype has a light and a shadow side. So this is really easy to understand in theory. When I say this, everybody grasps it very quickly, but much harder in practice. Let me give you an example. The vampire archetype, right? When we hear the word vampire, is there really anything good that comes to mind for the majority of us? Automatically, we consider the vampire a bad archetype. Now, the image of the vampire has been helped of late with the stream of vampire books and movies and TV shows that have come out. They've kind of aggrandized or glamorized the life of a vampire. We can see how the vampires can love, how vampires can be compassionate and have morality and ethics. So that has changed the archetype or the view of the archetype to some degree. But still, if we think about having the vampire as our own archetype, a lot of people would shy away from it because they'll see the shadow first. They'll think of it as a bad archetype because they're only seeing the shadow. That begs the question, what is the light aspect of the vampire, right? There is this really profound ability with the vampire to be able to channel, to tap into and channel the life force energy. That's what the blood is a metaphor for, is life force. And that ability to channel and tap into and channel life force energy can be a gift, can really be something that is helpful for others. A teacher of mine actually posed the theory. I don't know how popular this will be or not, but I've spent time thinking about it, and I think it's a very interesting idea. She posed the theory that people who are Reiki practitioners are actually working with the vampire archetype in the light aspect. Because what is Reiki but the channeling of life force energy, bringing it through, and you're actually doing that for good, doing that to heal others, and it's working with that archetype. Regardless of if you agree with that or not, it's an interesting theory to ponder, right? The vampire in the light aspect can see or sense the movement of this life force energy, which is also a gift. And it can alert us to a drain on our energy systems or where we might be draining somebody else's energy. So it has a very ethical or conscience-oriented gift. It helps us have a good conscience and be in good conscience about how we are acting in the invisible realm. And then, too, we know that vampires live forever. So there is a timeless or eternal view coming through with the vampire archetype that understands that history repeats itself, that understands that maybe there is nothing ever really new going on, but it all still has value. There's a more wise or sage-like perspective that comes through with the vampire archetype. So these are some examples of the gifts of the vampire archetype and the light aspect. Now let's look at an archetype that most of us inherently see as good, the angel archetype, kind of on the other spectrum of the vampire, right? And when we think of the angel, we think of all things good. We think of, wow, she's such an angel. She's so helpful. We think of that guidance that comes in out of nowhere. That is just a life-saving aspect, godsend, we say. Wow, she was such a godsend. And we think of angels as godsends. They're messengers from God or from the gods, depending on what your beliefs are. So there's all of the light aspect. We all are very familiar with that in terms of working with the angel, but we have a hard time seeing how the angel might have a shadow side. There might be a dark or unhelpful aspect to the angel. One of the easiest ways to see the shadow of the angel archetype is to think about little girls. Really well-behaved little children, especially little girls. And so let's think about a little girl who everybody characterizes as an angel. She's so well-behaved. She's such an angel. Well, that behavior, that angelic, pleasing, helpful behavior actually can be a mask. And the little angels are the ones that get away sometimes with the worst things because they use that as a cover to cover up their mischievous behavior. So it can be acting innocent or angelic to deceive others or manipulate a situation and get one's way. So that's where the ego comes in. The angel archetype does not imply that there's no ego involved. In the shadow, the ego absolutely comes through in the angel archetype. And another aspect of the angel archetype is ability to channel divine guidance and to be able to say, well, an angel came and talked to me and shared this information, or an angel tapped me on the shoulder and told me to lend a hand. So those are things in the light when the guidance is truly coming from a divine source that are very helpful. But sometimes in the shadow, somebody with the angel archetype can claim that they've received divine guidance to do one thing or another, but the guidance is actually coming from within the ego. It's some self-serving aspect that's using the excuse of divine guidance. So as we all know, that's quite a shadow aspect, right? So those are two archetypes that we would see really in one way or another, from one side or another. But when we pull in the opposing force within that archetype, we see that it can go either way. That actually the archetype stands somewhere in the center and is very neutral, right? I have a couple examples of archetypes that you might have an initial reaction to them, but via my explanation, you'll be able to understand how somebody might have another reaction. One example of this is the rescuer archetype. If you are someone who rescues others, you may actually see this archetype in the shadow as a burden, as just jumping to the rescue for people who need to learn how to help themselves, or for people who have no appreciation for what you've done for them. So as the rescuer, overdoing it, you can find yourself in a situation of being drained and resentful of those you are rescuing, and resentful of your role as the rescuer. Now think about the person being rescued. Think about a time in your life when you have been rescued. And think about how absolutely sublime the rescuer archetype is to you in that moment, and how eternally grateful you are. So you see that two totally different perspectives, right? And there are people who maybe actually have a job as a rescuer. They work as an EMT, and to them they take a lot of pride in that, in embodying that archetype. So they are in the light aspect of it. So there are a lot of different perspectives depending on who is in the role, what they're getting out of it, or who is benefiting from the role or not, right? And the last one that I want to talk about today is the beggar archetype. It's how do you see the beggar? I want you to answer this question first in your own mind before I go ahead and describe both sides. Do you see the beggar in a positive light? Do you think it's a good archetype? Or do you see it as in a negative light and think that it is a bad archetype? Okay? Now let me give you both sides. In the light aspect, the beggar is a really liberating archetype to be with because it breaks us free of the chains of material possessions, brings us into a trusting state with the universe or with God. And there are a number of examples of divine beggars in the world. Jesus Christ was one of them. The Buddha was another. That's a pretty big deal. So there you go, right? There's the light aspect of the beggar. In the shadow, we think of the person who always receives handouts, but never is able to get themselves off the street corner. Who always receives handouts, and rather than using those handouts, that money, to go buy food, to go buy clothing, to save up towards a deposit on an apartment to rent, they end up buying it or using it to buy drugs or alcohol and continue an unsavory, unhealthy, unhappy addiction. So yeah, a reliance on others to the detriment of oneself. That's the shadow side of the beggar. That sin of sloth, of expecting everybody else to do everything for you. So there you go. You see how of these 4 archetypes that they can absolutely go either way. So when you have an initial impression of somebody embodying a certain archetype and you see that as good or bad, your ability to come into the neutral position and see both the shadow and the light, regardless of your initial impression or of your initial take, is going to be what helps you stay level-headed, even-minded in any situation and be more accepting. If you want to learn more about me and what I do, you can always go to my website, which is wildgratitude.com. And of course, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I also encourage you to subscribe to my channel, and please post any comments you have in the section below. I'll be sure to reply to you. Thanks so much.